Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for your patience. Sorry for the delay. I don't know, my computer probably has to be cleaned out a little bit. Just taking a little long for things to happen. Okay, so we are on page 190, day 61, page 190. And this is a similar topic to what we spoke about 2 weeks ago. And I just want to reiterate something and actually bring out a point. I think that could be a tremendous lesson for us for Rosh Hashanah also. So the idea is like this, right? The situation we have is a very interesting situation. Yeah, you're having Shabbos lunch with your family at your fancy Tanta Eva's house. Right, we all have. I mean, I don't know, we all, but everybody has either. Some people have a fancy, tanta, aunt, or family member, or you go out to someone, whatever it is, right? Or a different situation that's a similar kind of situation. While she's in the kitchen, right, your cousin who's sitting next to you carelessly knocks over a wine glass and leaves a big red puddle on the white linen tablecloth. Right? I remember my grandmother, blessed memory. Right, she wouldn't let us sit on her couches, and now she wasn't very fancy, right? She was fancy in her own way, but I don't know why. But the couches, they were like, I don't know, 150 years old, not that old, but and she always said they're perfect. It said they're perfect, and we said yeah, because you never let anybody sit on it. I remember one time, like we jumped on it or whatever. We were kids. And he came in and said, who sat on it, right? So the question is, over here, it's a different thing. Over here, he spilled wine, or whatever the situation is, right? Tanti returns and says sharply to you, you need to be more careful around nice things. You don't want to embarrass your cousin, so you keep quiet. But later, when you're alone in the kitchen, while Tante Eva, she mentions, right, alone with Tante Eva, she mentioned it again. May you set the record straight, right? So whatever the situation is, if it's in this case, if it's this case or if it's a different case, right? If it's me and my brothers are playing around on the couch, so we're allowed to say who did it, right? If it's parents want to know who broke the window, right? Okay, so that could be a little different, right? But in situations where you have a scenario where, again, not necessarily are we concerned about monetary issues. That's what we spoke about last time, right? That was the case last time. If there's monetary issues, right, or if you could lose your job or things like that, this is more of just setting the record straight. You don't want to keep on being the one that's known in the family as a careless, that doesn't know how to handle fancy stuff or whatever the situation is. Are you allowed to set the record straight? What do you guys think? Anybody? Nobody?
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you, Chayla. You don't think so?
We talked about this a little bit last time, where it's like, you can say I didn't do it.
A little bit like last time, correct. I did.
Yeah, you can say I didn't do it, but you're not supposed to like say who did do it.
Okay.
Right?
We're going to get to that, exactly. That's close to that, correct.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay, so Emily's right. It is similar to last time, and that's what I said. It's a similar case, but I want to bring out a side point from what the ruling is that I think is also an important lesson that we could reflect on for Rosh Hashanah, as Rosh Hashanah is right around the corner. All right, so let's look at the answer. Right, in a situation where there's no other purpose than to vindicate yourself, you are not allowed to shift the blame to a guilty party. Even though it's a guilty party, and you're not allowed to shift the blame to a guilty party where it's just making yourself feel better, right? Just to vindicate yourself. You could, however, say, right, as we said, I wasn't the one who spilled the wine. However, if it doesn't leave, if doing so leaves your cousin as the only other, option, you should not even say those words. Right now, it doesn't say you can't say those words. It says you shouldn't say those words, right? Because you're not directly saying that your cousin did it. You're just saying I didn't do it. From your words is implied that it was your cousin, right? So therefore, it's better not to say that. The rule is different if you're being accused of something that is immoral or improper or would be a chil Hashem, desecration of God's name. Then you could deny your involvement. Even in doing so, automatically implicates someone else, right? So the ruling is, and this is similar to what we spoke about beforehand last 2 weeks ago. It is that by vindicating yourself, making yourself, seem better in other people's eyes or whatever it is. And again, we're not talking about if you're going to lose your job. We're not talking about if it's something immoral and therefore, people are not going to want to hang around you anymore. It's something that, whatever, a little carelessness of this, people might forget over time, or they might not forget over time, but it's not anything that's going to make you or break you, right? It's, okay, who broke the window? Okay, just be more careful next time, or, whatever it is, okay, you can't play downstairs soccer without supervision, whatever it is, right? It's not anything that's really going to make it or break it, right? The halacha is that part of lashon hara, of saying something about the other person, remember, it's even if it's true, right? You're not allowed to do that. Now, the question is, what's really the depth behind this, right? And why is it that the Talmud, and as I mentioned last time, right? I read it from inside from the Chavetz Chaim in the Hebrew. Excuse me. He quotes the Talmud that one who is ma'avir al midosav, one who is that ma'avir, he goes over midosav, means to say that he doesn't allow his anger, his emotions, right? His need for vindication like this, right? Not to blame someone else, right? Right? It's considered like as bright as a sun when it comes out in a clear sky, right? The Talmud has other sort of phrases, right? Lifnei mishurat hadin, going above and beyond Mishurat Adin, the letter of the law, right? Mishurat Adin, the way the law is supposed to be. So it is true that could be, as we said, it could be that maybe the letter of the law, you're allowed to say it wasn't me, right? But going Lifnei Mishurat Adin, above the letter of the law, right? There's the idea over here of staying quiet, right? Sort of taking it, right? And we mentioned stories in the Talmud of great rabbis that just took the blame, right? Again, not anything that would be a desecration of God's name or something that's immoral, right? But they sort of just held their tongue. What is it, and why is it that in something like this we have this idea? So I want to share with you a phenomenal idea, and I've probably mentioned this in the past, maybe different classes around Rosh Hashanah time, right? But I want to bring it out through this halacha, right? Rav Chaim Shmulevitz quotes a passage in the Talmud, right, and he elaborates on it, and it goes like this. The Talmud says, how do we make sure that we have a good judgment? Right now, Rosh Hashanah is actually a week from today, right, from last night, right? We're a week away. We're less than a week away from Rosh Hashanah. So we all want a good judgment. We know what's Rosh Hashanah, right? What's the symbol of Rosh Hashanah, right? The scales, right? A scale. Right? Because we're being judged, good and bad, and right. That we all have our sort of way of thinking of what judgment looks like, right? Whatever one might think, right? But we don't really know. But okay, right? At the end of the day, what we do know is the Rosh Hashanah is the day that we're judged. We all want a good judgment. But let's be honest, right? Let's be honest with ourselves. King Solomon said, look, there's not a righteous person that doesn't sin, right? We all have things, right? Maybe you guys are righteous, right, to the core, but I know myself, right? There's definitely things that I've muffed up on, right? Many things that I've muffed up on, right? Many things that a little scary to go into the day of judgment. Now, why aren't we petrified? That's not our conversation, right? That's a different conversation. And many have talked about this, right? Why sort of in our generation, it's not really that realistic to us. It is, right? We dip the apple in the honey, right? Then we blow the shofar, right? And we scream out, during prayer, right? Tefillah, tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah, ma'avir Yisrael gzeira, right? Repentance, prayer, and charity get rid of the terrible decree, right? Of course, we believe it, but it's not sort of something that is inherently, sort of when one is going to the court to fight a ticket, right, or something else. Right, they have they're shivering much more that day, or they can't eat that day than at least me, on Rosh Hashanah, or especially before Rosh Hashanah. Right, that's another conversation. That's an interesting discussion to have. Right, but how are we able to make sure that we have a good judgment? How are we able to make sure? How do we make sure? And Rav Chaim Shmulevitz quotes that from the Talmud and others that God judges us midah keneged midah, right? Measure by measure. Right? A midah is a measurement, right? Measurements of weight, right? Also measurement of how we act. Right? God judges us measure by measure. So what does that mean? So it goes like this. Says Rav Chaim Shmulevitz that God says, okay, let's look at the actual things, right? Okay, so Avi Fagimam, you did this, you gave those classes, okay, but you did this, right? You didn't do that. Maybe you did that, but you did this. Okay, so where are we on the scale of maybe somewhere in the middle, semi-close, okay, maybe a little higher there, maybe a little higher. We're not sure exactly. Maybe even a little higher, but it's not all the way. Okay, maybe you have to get a little positive. And then comes, right? God says, okay, that's the practical. But now, again, God is a judge different than Basar V'Dam, than a man, right? Flesh and blood. And God judges not only on the actual actions, but then God says, okay, but how do you judge other people? How do you react when other people do wrong to you? Because you did wrong to me, right? That's what we're being judged, right? God gave us laws. God gave us commandments, and God told us to do certain things a certain way or not to do things the other way, right? That's so we got wrong. We did wrong, right? Let's be honest. We also did a lot of good. Let's be honest. Let's be practical, right? We've done wrong. So God says, now that we have the practicalities out of the way and the actual things, now I want to see, how do you react to other people? Midah keneged midah. I will measure your actions based off how you measure other people's actions. So when someone slams the door in your face, right, or someone you're going to shul and someone doesn't hold the door for you, you go, what's wrong with that, bro? Why can't you just hold the door for me? Right? Or someone doesn't take the blame and you are blamed. Maybe in the letter of the law, you have the right to say, it wasn't me. God has in the letter of the law to say, look at your actions. So how do you judge other people? Says Rav Chaim Shmulevitz that the best way to make sure that we have a good judgment is not necessarily, of course, throughout the year, trying to make sure that our actions are perfect, right? But let's be honest. King Solomon said, there's not a righteous person in the world that doesn't sin. We're humans. God knows that. And we all have transgressions. We all have it. So it says, we have to work on also, of course, we have to work on our actions and make sure that we're growing or doing the right thing. But we also have to make sure that we work on allowing God, but to give God the opportunity to judge us in a favorable manner and to look the other way, because God judges us also measure by measure. And therefore, when we look the other way sometimes, when we sort of take it on, I'll take I don't want the other person to get hurt. I don't know how they're going to react. I'll just, it's okay. It's okay. Whatever. Just lay it out on me. Right? Or someone else, you hear gossip, whatever it is, and you decide to hold yourself back from pushing that forward, even if it might be true. You are refraining yourself from saying, but that's true. And people have to know. Again, we're not talking about something that's dangerous. I remember we talked about that. There's the toelis for positive things. Just, people should know that this person, did X, Y, and Z. Not anything that's, God forbid, dangerous or harmful or psychological dangerous to other people, whatever it is. And we're not talking about something like that. Because most of the things that we talk and we say are not like that. But we hold ourselves back and say, it's not for me to judge that person, why they did it, why they didn't do it. It's not really harming anybody, right? And, other people, other people don't really need to know. We don't need to spread that. So God says, ooh, that's how you look at other people? So yeah, you did something wrong. I'm going to give you the benefit of that. I'm not going to sort of spread it to the angels and the courthouse out there. I'll sort of keep it to myself. Have a way that works. Again, there's all mystical things. But this idea of the lefnei, that's what's called lefnei mishurat adin, going above, lefnei, in front of the letter of the law, lefnei, in front of mishurat adin, the letter of the law. There's sort of this block, right, that goes and says, even though in the letter of the law I'm allowed to do this, even though in the letter of the law I could, say it wasn't me, even though in the letter of the law, God says you really should be punished for this, but there's now this thing that goes in front of the judgment. It says, well, he went in front of the judgment, or she went in front of the judgment of the actual letter of the law, and said, you know what, I'll take it on. I'm not going to judge. I'm not going to move this forward, right? Because it's not really harming anybody. It's not really endangering anybody. I'm not getting, physically in danger or a terrible financial loss. That's what we call a name Sharat Adin. And God judges us mida keneged mida. So our greatest advocate, right? Our greatest weapon that we might have on our judgment day is that weapon of the Fnei Meshurat Adin. Getting God to judge us, the Fnei Meshurat Adin. And what do we say on Rosh Hashanah? Right? What do we say on Rosh Hashanah so many times in our prayer? Right? We ask God to take himself off the kisei of din, of judgment, and to go on to the kisei of rachamim, of mercy. What is this kisei of rachamim? Kisei of rachamim doesn't make sense. It's a judgment day. It's a judgment day. He's on a seat of judgment. He has his robe and his hammer. Judgment. Right? What does it mean, kisei rachamim, of mercy? And the answer is what we just spoke about. Because we're asking God to deal with us, name is short, above the letter law. Give us another chance. Give us another year to change things. Right? Don't give me the opportunity to, not spill wine again on the carpet, and I won't be shamed and whatever it is. Even though you are, but I can handle it. It's fine. I'm okay. But that person, whatever it is. Right? We're asking God to give us another chance, not to take our action face value, but to realize that we have hardships, and to judge us with our repent, and with our imperfection of who we are, and to look the other way. So this idea, right, that we're talking about now, right? When I was reading it, and I said, okay, you know what? I know we spoke about this a lot last week, 2 weeks ago, right? But I think this idea is so important for us to work on, right? And yes, our natural and our go-to is what's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong. Right? I've heard it many times, and I've said it many times. Right and wrong, right is wrong, and wrong is wrong. And we just have to, you know what? When we're behind the stand, right? We're on our judgment day. I don't want to be judged as right as wrong, wrong. Right? I'm not perfect. Far from it. And I want God to say, okay, we're going to look a little the other way this time, Avi. All right? We're going to give you another chance. Let's see how you do this year. All right? We're going to make sure you stay healthy, your family stays healthy, and give you another chance. Right? Make sure that you are able to provide for your family and not have hardships, right? That will not give you the opportunity to do whatever you good things that you want to do. Whatever it is. I don't know. I'm not God. But whatever it is, right? I want God not to necessarily say what's right is right, is wrong is wrong. I want God to say, we're going to give you another chance. But we have to start giving other people other chances. That doesn't take away from what's right is right and wrong is wrong, just to clarify that, right? If there's a teaching moment, you have to teach what's right and wrong, right? And if you have the opportunity to speak to your cousin and you have that relationship or whatever it is and say, hey, I was fine, taking the blame, and I understand, but, from your end, let's have a discussion. Only if you have that relationship. If they think that you're just making yourself all self-righteous, then don't, because that's just going to be worse. But if you have that relationship, or if it's something, that you could say, hey, at a different time, let's try to work on our etiquette of how to be around, a table, right? Let's try to fix the mistake. Spoke about this many times. Doesn't take away that there are mistakes, right? Doesn't mean to say that we don't have to educate if we have that opportunity. Just because we're judging someone favorably doesn't mean to say their action wasn't a wrong action. But if we're judging them favorably, right, and there's no need to spread the word right? Or there's no need to get all frustrated and angry because they didn't keep the door open for you, right? Or by mistake, they stubbed your toe at Kiddush, right? Or they cut you off on the road, right? Or whatever it is. So then we should judge them favorably. Not their action. The action is wrong, but judge them favorably. So you want God to judge us. God's not saying that the actions that we did wrong are right. That's not what we're asking. We're not asking God to change the judgment. We're asking God to go the name is sure at the day. Sort of in front, an extra type of judgment of saying, you know what? We're going to look now at the individual, the why, not just at the action. So to us. But again, it doesn't mean to say that the action is not wrong. You have to know if you're the right person to say something or not to say something, right? And it doesn't make it. It doesn't. If someone said, "Well, I just can't because you know I'm a righteous person. I go with the letter. And this is a wrong." Okay, yes, the action's wrong. So you could tell yourself and convince yourself, and it's probably right. The action might be wrong. But it doesn't mean to say that the person is not a human. It doesn't mean to say that the person didn't have difficulties with what happened. And it doesn't mean to say that the person regrets what he did or whatever it is, he or she, or didn't have the education or whatever it is, didn't have the resources. So why are you judging the person? Why do you need to make sure everybody knows about this? Why do you need to justify the situation and get rid of your and vindicate yourself? You can handle it. You're a big boy. You can handle it. Not going to harm you physically, emotionally. You're going to see your aunt Eva not for another year, and who knows when it happened in a year. You'll go back to your place and you'll be fine. Whatever it is, that is one of the greatest things we have. Our armor, protection, whatever you want to call it, right? For us to have the best judgment that we're able to have. Any questions or comments on that? Go ahead.
I do.
Go ahead.
So what happens, like, if you're in the kitchen and Aunt Eva or whoever she was, asks you to your face, did you spill the wine? What do you, if you say no, you're not going to lie and say yes, or how do you respond?
That's an excellent question. That's really a good question. Anybody have any thoughts on Cindy's question?
And I have another one too.
Okay, Emily?
No, I was going to say, if she asks you directly to your face, did you spill the wine? Then it seems like that to me is a little different, because now that would be the answer would be, if we can respond by saying, I didn't do it, right? Then if she says, did you do it? Then how is that different than saying no? Unless, like, it just seems to go back to the same thing, except like you said, if there's only your cousin left at the table, then I guess that, then I guess you could make a decision. Like, does that make sense to take the blame for something,
Okay.
But it's like by saying, hey, I didn't do it. If she said, hey, you need to be more careful, and you said, hey, I didn't do it. Then if she says, did you do it? You could say, hey, I didn't do it, unless it makes sense to cover for your cousin. But if your kid just broke her vase 30 minutes ago, it might not be, you might not want to take the blame for it, because she might already be angry at you. I don't know. That's just
okay. So you're right. Your point is well taken, right? So I would say like this, right? If you're able to avoid the conversation, if sometimes someone asks you a direct question and you sort of avoid the question and say, is there anything else I can do to help you? Is you have a really beautiful kitchen or whatever it is, and sort of try to avoid the question. And people know that you're avoiding the question. It means to say that you don't want to answer it, right? It's not necessarily, it is a little rude, but it's not necessarily rude, because someone asks you a direct question that you feel uncomfortable answering, right? And they might take it as, oh, you don't want to answer directly because you're embarrassed to say it or whatever, right? But you're not outright lying, and you're avoiding the question, and you're not necessarily saying that your cousin did it either. So now that would be the first thing I would try to do, is try to avoid the question, right? It means to try to change the conversation, however way possible, if it's possible, right? Now, if it's not possible and ask you again or whatever it is, right? So then this is where we are lefnei meshura tadin. You have, as Emily said, you have to weigh the situation and say, how far am I going to take this, right? Right? How far am I going to take this? Now, regarding lying, right? Lying it's not necessarily lying if you are, it is what we call would be a white lie if you take it on. But we find in the Talmud, right? We find in the Talmud, the story that I mentioned 2 weeks ago, right, is that one of the rabbis took the blame, right? He said, yeah, it was me, right? He took the blame directly. He said it was him, even though it wasn't him, right? So when you're, regarding lying, right? It's another whole class, and we actually gave a lunch and learn on this. I don't know, probably about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, right? We learned from Yaakov Avinu, from Jacob, our forefather, right, that what we would call lying, right? MS, right, and sheker is not what the dictionary says lying. It's also the outcome is part of the answer. Now, I know we tell our kids not like that, but that is a whole discussion of what MS is. MS is to have the true outcome. Now, the true outcome not necessarily means to say what the dictionary would say is right and wrong. The true outcome over here is that you are protecting your cousin, right? And you're okay with taking that because you know your cousin can't handle it, or right, or whatever it is, or even if maybe they could, but you know you don't want them to get the wrath of your aunt, right? Even though they'll be able to handle it, and therefore, since the outcome is a true outcome, it's for the betterment of what's going on, so that is not necessarily considered lying, right?
And
One second, Chayla, right? The Talmud, and again, it's a whole separate conversation. But the Talmud tells us that if you go to someone's house, there's also how to what if the food wasn't good? Are you allowed to say the food was good or not good? Right? There's a whole thing of making other people feel better or saying things in a certain way, right? There are times of when the English dictionary, what would be considered lying, is not a contradiction to MS, but that's a whole nother discussion, and we can't just take from our small conversation now out into the world, but it has to be more in depth of how do we categorize that, right? But for our conversation here, I would say that one has to make an account for themselves. Yes, if they're asked directly. So then we're within the Mifnei Meshur Sadin category, but even more than just not saying anything, right? It wasn't me, right? Because you're asked directly. And therefore, you have to start calculating within yourself of how far could I take this and how much do I want to implicate myself or say that it was me directly if I can't avoid the situation. And I would say that there's no right or wrong answer. It depends on how much you're able to take. It's the neighbor church. It's above the letter of the law. It is within the category of above the letter of the law. Question is, how far can you take that above the letter of the law? Yeah, Chayla.
okay, so can you say, rather than say it was me or it wasn't me, can't you just say, I'm sorry that happened?
You could. That's what I say. Try to avoid the situation. 100%. Right? If that's a great way of saying it. Try to say, "I'm sorry that happened," right? Or change the topic completely. Said, "Oh, I love your paintings. So, where did you get your paintings from?" Right? Or whatever. Right? However way you're able to change the conversation, even though yes, Sherry, it will seem like you are guilty, but you're not saying it out directly that you're guilty. And by not saying anything, also that sort of if who did this, or why did you do this, and you don't say it wasn't me, right? That also shows a little bit that you're guilty. But again, that's the name of Shur. That's where the going above the letter of the law. Again, as long as it's not hurting you financially, physically, right? Financially, if something that is hurting you financially, not the a couple of dollars or every person based on their thing, right? Or if it's something immoral, right? That's all within the category of the name of Shur. Cindy, you said you had another question?
Well, yeah, I guess. I mean, it's almost like you're saying, take it and let it take take the blame almost and then just let it go. That's what we're
If you're able, yeah, if you're able to do that. If you can't, if you,
right. That's really hard.
right, yes, that's true. Right.
I mean,
that's-
why should I yeah.
No, you're right. Why that, and that is a legitimate, that's why it's above the letter of the law. You're right. In the letter of the law, you're right. You don't have to, right? You don't have to, right? But that's the idea of going above the letter of the law, is that if you're able to handle it and you're able to shrug it off, what's right and wrong, and just let it be, right? So that's going above the letter of the law. You're protecting someone else. And you are not directly saying that someone else did something also, which is shifting the blame. Once again, in the letter of the law, again, there's a difference of saying the other person did it or saying I didn't do it, even though it's implied that the other person did it, right? But that's something that's above the letter of the law. That's where righteousness comes in. Righteousness in the sense of looking within yourself and saying, I could handle this, and why? Because of my actions, someone else got hurt. Even though they did the wrong thing, but why? Because of my actions, someone else got hurt. And that is working above the letter of the law. And as we said, that's how we want God to work with us. Right? That's what we want God to do. We want racham, we want mercy, right? And God's saying, I'm going to shift. I'm not going to blame you right now. So I'm going to sort of hold it within myself. God's hurt, right? In a metaphorical way, right? God, we don't know how God is, but in that, as a, in the matter, God is sort of like hurt, right? But God's looking the other way. We want God to do that with us, right? So we should start learning from it and start doing it with other people if we're able to. If it's too hard, if it's going to emotionally drain you, if it's going to emotionally hurt you, so then not necessarily is this the right thing for you. Now is not the time to be righteous. Again, if it's something immoral or something that's going to ruin your position in the community, whatever it is, it's something that's really dramatic. That's not the right place, right? So you have to know what the situation is, right, to be able to do that. But yeah, that's called the Fnei Mashur Zadin, going above the letter of the law. Does that help?
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
Can I make a comment?
Please.
It's hard for me. I have a hard time keeping my mouth shut.
Really?
No, I was going to say, I think that it's interesting because if you go back to the story of Adam and Chava, so the first thing they did wrong was that they ate from the fruit. But I think almost tantamount to that was that when Hashem asked them, he asked Adam, he blamed Chava. And so you see and that had catastrophic effects. And so this idea of that from all of the issues that not all the issues, but I'm saying all of so much of the way that we have our lives and the way that we exist spiritually comes from that episode. And so in a way, I think it makes sense that taking the blame for someone else when you're not going to have severe consequences or whatever it is, but it's almost like creating a you're almost fixing that original problem. You're almost fixing that you're doing something in the world spiritually to fix that original situation where Adam blamed Chava. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're 100% correct. We spoke about this. This point, I actually in a sermon I spoke about it once. I spoke about it over Shana a couple of times, right? But you're 100% correct. The Archaim and other commentaries point out that the real punishment of death, right, in the world, not necessarily came because they ate from the tree, and it wasn't because Adam ate from the tree. It was because he blamed Chava. Right, and there's 2 points. Number one, he was a kafar tov, means to say that he didn't recognize the good that God gave him, and he just he was like God he was ungrateful, right? God gave him a wife, and he just threw it back at God. It's the gift you gave me. It's all your fault, really, God, because you gave me this and that really ruined me. Right. So that's number one. Right. It's called kafar tov, ungrateful. Right. And number two, right, is shifting the blame to someone else. The difference of over there in our case is where over there Adam did do something wrong. So it was more than just shifting, not taking the blame when someone else did something wrong, right? But it's also pushing the blame on someone else when you did something wrong. Right. So that would be even more than Lifnei Mashur. Then that would be part of God said you did something wrong. I'm sort of taken on. Said, yes, I did something wrong. Right. So that's the idea of the commentary say that we have to take responsibility for our actions. Right. And that was the whole conversation we spoke about on Rosh Hashanah, right? That the step number one of change is taking responsibility for your actions, realizing what we're doing, right? And not always, we always have reasons to shift blame to someone else. I had a bad teacher, I had this, I had that, right? I had a bad experience with a rabbi when I was, 5 seconds old, right? Whatever it is, right? We always shift blame, right, onto other people. It's my experience, it's my time, it's my work, it's my dad. We're constantly shifting blame, right? And the conversation we're having on Rosh Hashanah, I don't remember when, right, was that the step number one of making and changing our future, right, and making sure that we have a good judgment and looking to make sure that our resolutions or whatever it is proper to next year, is better in the next year, is taking responsibility, right, taking responsibility for our actions, and that was the lesson that the commentaries tell us. That were, or Adam Arisa, and again, let's not forget, we're talking about Adam. He was a lofty person, he was a spiritual person, right? But the lessons that we're supposed to learn, one of the lessons is that Adam lacked in this idea of taking responsibility, and that's really what started the whole chain of events. So it's slightly different than over here where you didn't do anything wrong. So it's not shifting responsibility. Over here, we're talking about doing something above the letter of the law and sort of taking the blame, right? Even though it wasn't you that did it. You see here the difference, Emily?
Yeah, I'm saying this is like the opposite. Like, so it's like the middle. I think to me, like the right ground is I did something wrong and I claim responsibility. The wrong extreme is I did something wrong and I'm blaming.
I hear what you're saying.
And then and then the tikkun would be I didn't even do anything wrong, but I'm taking the blame. So
okay.
I'm going to like the other end of it to try to rectify that idea that like I don't want to take the blame for anything, whether it's my actions or someone else's actions. To me, it's just like the opposite. It's like the opposite end of the spectrum, that like you're going above, like you said, like you're going above the letter of the law and you're actually taking blame for something someone else did. And I think also one of the things that I think it's really hard for people is that this is so against what we learn in like society, like this is just like what Cindy was saying. It's like, that's not what we're taught is right and wrong. We're taught that like, if I didn't do something, it's my, I'm going to clear my name. And, so it's like, it just goes in the face of, I think, what we're all brought up with. And so it makes it really hard to understand how that like makes sense logically. Like logically, why would I do that? It doesn't make sense. We're not taught that's logical. So I think that's what's really hard, is understanding how that is a good thing.
Right.
I'm done.
But no, yeah, you're 100% correct, 100%. But at the same time, if we all stop and reflect for a minute, we would all want someone else to do that for us. And even though it's so hard for us to do that for someone else, but we would all want someone else to do that for us. And that if we were in a bind or whatever it is, to sort of just take the blame for it, that we can move on, right? Or to look the other way and not make a whole big to do and post it on Facebook and Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is that something happened over here. It's not that no one else is really getting hurt or whatever it is, or have be the gossip on in Kiddush or whatever it is. And that's something that we would love for someone else to do for us, but at the same time we have such a hard time for doing for someone else, and that's why it's called the Lifnei Mashur above the letter of the law, because it is hard, right? It is hard. It is right against our nature. Okay, thank you everybody for joining. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you all for joining. I'm going to stop.